Welcome back to Game Design. This is Lesson 8, Sprite Properties. So leading off from what are sprites? We learned that last lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn about more of the properties. So we did the set animation one, right? That sets what the image is for it. But in this case, we're going to learn some of the beginning ones that we can use. So with that, we'll jump right into the prediction. And if we see this, we have var b, right? So again, this is creating a sprite, right? This is not creating a b. It's not a b yet. This is just creating the variable. That's a sprite. So at this point, it's just a square. Right? So as we're looking through this code, and then this next piece, right, it's setting the animation. So this is what makes it look like it. This is still a property, right? This is still a property of the b. So we've already used this before. Again, this dot notation, the b is the sprite. You can access its properties by putting a dot there. So originally, this b is 200 by 200, right? That's dead center, remember? So you have the square, then it turns into a b. So what you need to do is answer this first, which hopefully you already did, and then run it. Which it starts at 200, 200, but then b.x, b.y, well, the x 350, y 350, and that's why it's down here. Again, originally it's here, and then it moves down. So that's kind of this concept of properties as we go through the next few levels. And there's not much to this lesson. But it is important to understand, right? There are a lot of different properties. You have to call it all the same. If I call it anything else, I call it sprite, it's not going to work. This is the property system. So with that, we're going to jump on to the next one for a few more examples. All right, in this case, we have we're going to run this, right? So this one is run it, and then we're going to look at this as we do it, right? So it wants this paintbrush to be in the paint. Now, I normally try to get into the blue paint because I want to, but we'll look at the code real quick. This is the palette. Again, it's a square. This is setting the palette to the palette. This is the brush. And again, I think the default is 200, 200, so they didn't actually type that in, but that's fine because you can see here we're actually setting the location. So the palette is 100, 300, so 100, 300, and the brush is 300, 100. We need to pull it down here. Now, a really useful feature, which I mentioned before, is remember the cursor shows you where it is. So this is 145, 225. Now remember the middle of this is where it's going to be. So you kind of got to think about from here to here, I need to put my cursor, what will put that. So I'm looking at those two numbers, and I'm just going to round to even numbers. So 130, 235, so 130 over 235. Reset and run, and there you go. It is inside the blue because I was guesstimating that this right here was 130, 235. We'll put the tip over here. So that's an easy one. Down here, now you can't see it when I'm actually circling it, but now you can see it. You can see that's how I'm using XY. And that helps you figure out where everything is. Also, you can see, all right, you can see the X going up, which when we start getting to movement, remember some of the stuff that we're doing. All right, last one, and then you'll start working on your own stuff. Last example, level 3. So we have a lot of properties, right? We're going to see 2 more in this, and we run it, and you'll see it on these first 2, right? So we have our background, we have a drum set, we have note 1. Now what's different is it has these 2 after it. So this is the original, right? I just kind of mentioned that's the original. So scale of 0.3. Now another thing I want to point out, and you will need this later on as we get through, is you don't need to know what everything is. As I mentioned, you don't need to know what all these parameters are. If you hover over them, it'll give you some information. This one's not super helpful. However, it does have examples, which brings you to the screen, and you can see what you can put. Now this is important because in the future you see something like tint. And if you don't know what to put there, if you start putting a number, you won't realize that it calls for a color, right? So you're like, why is this not working? It also explains the default's 1, right? So this is a default of 1. 0.3 is 30% of 1, right? So that's one way you can look at it, is this is 30%. Now, rotation, you can do the same thing and check it out. I do recommend, if you don't know what something does, to kind of do a little bit of research. But rotation is defaulting to zeros, right? So up and down is 0. 20% means it tilts 20% from 0. And then note 2 is a 70% scale, right? 0.7 is a 70%, and minus 30 means it goes backwards. Now you could also do 360 minus 30 and get 330, right? And right, it's the exact same thing, right? It's on a 360. If you do over 360, if I do 380, right, it's just going to be 20, right? Because 360, right, it's at the same angle as that. So really, anything above or below 360 is still going to make it in that circle reference, right? Negative just makes it easier for you to understand. I'm going to turn it to the left, so I'm going to use negative, and I can get it to go where I want, right? But again, as I just showed you, you could just do the 300 value that makes it go all the way around to the same spot. Because at the end of the day, again, this is just a 360 rotation for it. All right, all it wants us to do is go ahead and do that for note 3 and 4, and you can check anything. So I'm just going to do one of these. You can do, if you should be able to do 2 just as easy. The big change is I'm going to make sure I use the correct one, right? So note 3, and then I can actually make it bigger, right? So I'm going to do 2, and I've already messed with the X. So I'm just going to do 180, make it upside down, and then reset this, and now you can see this one is upside down and ginormous. All right. So that's an easy way to change the scale of stuff. Now, if you start losing image quality or whatever, you can also go back here and use the thing over here, if you remember from the actual video from code.org. You do have to kind of play with some of this, main canvas size. There are things you can mess up. It'll start cutting, cropping stuff. So you might have to replay, but when you're done, resize it, and that'll get smaller as well. So that is it for this. You're going to practice going through and doing rotations. Make sure when you're doing this one, you realize which direction, so the headlights are the direction. So remember how cars work. Get that correctly. Do the assessment, and then come over to challenges. And this is the one I was talking about. Again, if you don't know what alpha and tint are, make sure to do research, or it's not going to make a lot of sense when you're like, all I'm making is shades of black. All right. So with that, that's all there is to this lesson. Go ahead and work through your activities. We'll see you next lesson.